Hello everyone, and welcome to the Future of Dogs podcast, a place for the whole dog world to come together and ask the big why and what if questions that will shape the dogs of the future. Join me, Hannah Malloy, as we chat to some of the world's most groundbreaking professionals intent on enriching and evolving the future of dogs. This podcast is in association with Amplified Behaviour, my online video learning library for dog owners and dog geeks. Big thanks to my dog's favourite food and our Season 1 sponsor, Nature's Menu. With over 40 years in the pet food business, Nature's Menu is Europe's leading expert in raw and natural pet food. So let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to the Future of Dogs podcast, and this episode is titled The Future of Dog Rescue Part 2, and it's my absolute pleasure to reintroduce you to our guest, Kelly Gorman Dunbar. Hello, Kelly.
Hello there. Nice to see you again.
Great to see you. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good.
Good. So last time, Kelly, we were talking about Open Paw, and we just mic dropped on the principles of Open Paw and what Open Paw is and how it can affect rescue. So tell us a little more about Open Paw, practically speaking. How would I know an Open Paw rescue from a normal rescue or an Open Paw dog from, so like a normal shelter dog?
Right into the nitty gritty. So the first thing I think that will identify an open paw shelter is that it is, and you alluded to this in the last episode, it's quiet. Quiet shelter. You walk in, and instead of the incessant barking and this howling or crying of the animals, you just walk in like it's a hotel. It's quiet.
Wow.
So I think that's one of our biggest hallmarks and tells. But also you'll notice that the staff is welcoming. And that's, it's not always the case when you come to a shelter, whether as a volunteer or as a person just looking for an animal, passerby. You will see signage that is instructing you to become a mini behavior specialist.
What?
And every single person who comes in has an opportunity and is welcomed to help teach the animals and help teach the animals something right from the get-go.
Wow.
And that's really important when you're a volunteer, especially because, yes, of course, there are procedures and protocols and safety issues and all of these things that you must learn when you come into work in a facility as a volunteer. Mm-hmm. But also you're there to be with the animals. So we make sure in Open Paw shelters that you as a volunteer are up and running day one, affecting behavior change for the better for these animals. So you definitely get hands-on right away, even if it is just through the kennel. So easy signage, quiet kennels. You'll see dogs chewing on chew toys. They'll have their beds, and they'll have a quiet space they can retreat to. Same for cats. They'll have their toys, their chew toys. The animals are hand fed. You'll see that there are usually bins or buckets or some kind of container on the outside of kennels for cats and dogs, so that you can interact with them through their kennels and feed them.
Wow. What?
You also have a primarily clean kennel. It won't stink, and there won't be dogs that are smeared in their own feces or cats sleeping in their litter boxes, because they have alternatives and that are provided. Because it's, as a shelter, I think it's essential and non-negotiable to meet the standards of your adoption criteria, but within your walls. If you wouldn't adopt to yourself as an organization, then you need to change things up, because you are modeling for the people who come in.
Yep.
And you are, ultimately you're responsible for these animals, and they need some basic care. You'll see toilet areas for the dogs, cute toilet areas usually outside the kennels. And volunteers busily going along. It should be relatively bustling, not busy, but bustling. It's not hectic, it's not frantic, but people should be going around interacting with the animals.
Wow. That sounds like some sort of magic Disneyland variant, Kelly, by comparison to a lot of what most of us, I imagine, think of when we think of rescue centres. Like, how is that possible? How do you manage to get dogs to be silent and chill out? What happens during the open paw process that isn't just a magic wand on these dogs? Or, how do you do that? That's incredible.
Well, the simplest and most beautiful part of it really is the hand feeding and the toy, the Kong feeding and the toy feeding. This chewing and licking. So let's talk about the toys first, before we bring the animals in. Instead of feeding the animals in bowls, they get chew toys, at least for the duration of the day. In some situations, or if an animal has a special need, obviously we change things up. But and maybe at the end of the day, they get a food bowl to round out their diet. But what I have found universally, I'm going to go there. I think without exception, in shelters, animals are overfed by bowl.
Wow. Okay.
They get a giant dump of food, and it doesn't seem, just slopped in again, kind of like the prison ward. Here's your daily gruel.
Sure.
And it's always it's not measured. It doesn't seem in a lot of cases. And I know people will say that it is measured. I hear you out there. Well, of course, everyone has their own. But when you're doing just the daily runs, I think it becomes whoever's doing it, even not nefariously, but might just be dumping more. Or again, food is love, so there might be a couple of volunteers sneaking some extra in. But they just give these enormous food bowls, and the food loses value if they're overfed, and it's also messy and not so great. But also, even if they love the food, it's gone in seconds flat. And then bored and have nothing else to do. So these chew toys help them. You stuff the food into the toys, and then they lie down, and they're licking and rolling the toy around. We would mostly use passive chew toys, what I call passive chew and food dispensing toys versus active. And the difference being active would be like a puzzle toy or like a Kong wobbler where they have to whack it, or roll a ball around. And we do use those kind of interactive toys, but know that when you do, you're activating a dog, and they're using the brain, but they may be activating. Whereas if you use a Kong or like a topple or something open that's rubber that they need to lick mat in some cases, then they're lying down and they're calming down and they're chewing and they're licking, and their mouth is busy, not barking, and they're not frantically pacing back and forth. And it takes them longer to finish their meals. Which now we've got an activity. Now food time is an activity time and a calming activity, not just a 5 second, or 10 second, hoovering back to pacing. So that keeps them busy. It keeps them calm, and the expectation of the routine of every day, at least 3 times a day, we're going to get our meals this way.
Wow.
Our snacks, I think also calms them down a little bit. But then, certainly they can have more chew toys and things throughout the day as well. The second part of that is the hand feeding, and that is the magic. If every person who comes through the kennel run area can just simply toss some food in, couple pieces, and we often season the kibble. We coat it with a little bit of freeze-dried liver or something, some freeze-dried meat powder. Just coating the kibble so the olfactory experience is different than just regular kibble and richer, without all the calories and without all the richness of actually giving these treats all day. Because it's an olfactory experience for them. Let's be realistic. The way they
if it smells good, it tastes good. Yeah,
they're not savoring every bite and chewing every morsel. They're smelling it and then eating it really quickly. So, enriching the food, enhancing the food is a good idea, and then you can change it up. Novelty is also great for them, right? So one day maybe it is beef liver, then another day it's going to be freeze-dried chicken powder, or maybe, whatever it may be. Some. Makes the food stinky with some bacon bits and baggies overnight, and then put it in there. They don't have to have the actual rich meats. So they're expecting when people come through, instead of this slamming up against the kennel, pick me, can I go out? Me. They're expecting somebody to come up and toss some food in. And that expectation brings them to the front of the kennel often, and makes them focus on you with expectation versus demand barking. Occasionally, you'll still get a demand barker, but we can talk about that later. We have things to do for that as well. And they, so they become a little more pro-social, they become a little more comfortable, and the anticipation is there. But the anticipation is that they're going to get food rather than a randomized walk. And we'll dig into this a little bit deeper, but also we have their walk schedule, kind of on a walk scheduled, basically, versus just random. So they can expect that at a certain time. So there isn't that frantic, is it me? Is it going to be me? Like, we don't want them thinking that this is a slot machine and they just won the lotto.
Yeah.
They just have the comfort that they are going to get their food, they're going to get their chew toys, and then they're going to have their training time and interaction time, and then they're going to have their potty walks, and they don't have to worry, is it coming? When is it coming?
Wow.
All of these things calm them down.
Wow.
And then with the hand feeding, the volunteers and staff and public very quickly learn, sure, tossing a food tureen is great, and you're never going to do any harm by doing that. You're just helping them form positive associations with people coming into the kennel, and all sorts of people, all shapes and sizes and smells, and everything. That we're all unique to a dog. We're a landscape of silhouette and scent and movement that that they take in. So it's good for them to generalize that all people are good, not just that one special volunteer that comes and scratches my belly.
Yeah.
So you're never going to do wrong by classically conditioning, just feeding and forming the positive associations. But we also very quickly get people looking for what we call universally good quote unquote behaviors. I say quote unquote because dogs are just being dogs when they're doing any behavior, really. So I don't like to qualify behavior as good and bad, really, but there are universally acceptable behaviors, right? A dog that is sitting politely for a greeting is not going to get in trouble, is not going to hurt anybody or scare anybody the way that a dog that might be like, hi, I'm jumping up at you, I'm in your face, I want to lick you, put their paws up on you, might frighten somebody or might be too rude or knock somebody over. So we're looking for universally acceptable behaviors and also pro-social behaviors like coming forward and making eye contact, which can be hard for some dogs, especially to generalize.
Yeah.
But we quickly teach people what to look for. So now everyone's also observing and learning a little bit about dog behavior.
Yes.
That a wag isn't just a happy wag necessarily, for instance. And, are we looking for a paw raise? Are we looking for cute little head tilt? What can we do that helps this animal feel better? Because how they tell you, even if you're not feeling great, you should smile.
It's the Michael Jackson song, isn't it? Smile through your fear and sorrow. It's true.
And it does start to have an effect. It's hard to smile and not have your behavior change.
Sure.
And it's the same with the dogs. If they're coming forward and they're sitting calmly, then they start to feel calmer as they go. If they're looking at you and you're teaching soft pro-social behaviors like wiggles or paw raise or elbow bends with a bow, these are all behaviors that that do have emotions attached to them. And we can identify when the dog is more comfortable, and we can also help them become more comfortable with a little bit of now operant, training here, right? So now we're going to wait and we're going to look, we're going to shape a little bit. We're going to look for what that dog, as we call it, all or none training. You have the kibble and you're going to look, you're just going to hold on to it for a second. Maybe you fed a few classical conditioning wise first, and now you're going to hold on for a second and you're going to see what that dog does next. And you stop feeding. And some dogs will certainly bark or hit the fence in the front of the fence. Hey, what happened?
Give me the food, lady. What's going on? Yep.
And you wait through that. And there's people say, oh, he never stops barking, he never stops jumping, he never stops pacing. Well, that's not true. There's always a moment. They have to stop. And I want people to observe those moments and mark them and then reward the dog for these behaviors. So if the dog's been jumping and jumping and jumping, they might finally go and stop and look at you, or barking and, sigh or look at you or pause and, oh, look at that, or stop to glance at the kennel next to them. It doesn't matter why they stopped. It's just they stopped,
Yes.
and now I have an opportunity. So we're shaping their behavior as well as we're auto training them and auto shaping them, but we're also consciously shaping their behavior to be calm and quiet.
Wow. So there's like multiple layers there of training that are happening that are quite subtle actually, but hugely impactful. So the first thing you said was actually just giving them toys that encourage the behavior of lying down. So we're thinking rubber toys. I don't want to throw too many brand names out there. This is my TV training coming through. They're like, just say food-based toys.
Rubber follows
Rubber. Yeah, things you can stuff food inside that are rubberized. And then the second thing there was actually just feeding dogs through the kennel. And I know because I've seen it, Kelly, but for those of you who are like, what does that even, I can't even imagine how that would work. You want volunteers to put their hands in the kennel. Some of them have feeding chutes, right? So if you know the dog's maybe a bit snatchy, potentially a little bit dangerous to go really close to, you might have like a sort of a ski jump type slope.
They learn to sit at the bottom of that and they catch.
That's so cool. It's like those 2p machines in England that you want to put some money in the charity box and it goes and spins around. So it's quite a lot of fun. And you're really actively then also stopping and shaping those behaviors. That is so cool. And enabling, aren't you, those volunteers to realize, hold on, my behavior affects the dog's behavior in a positive way. That's really cool.
Hence, education begins, right, for people.
Yeah, so good, so good. And you also reduce the amount of toileting that goes on in the kennels, right? I know my head exploded, Kelly, when you told us this story about the female dog who'd just come in who was label reactive and what you observed. Could you just give our listeners a little more detail on that story and what you discovered?
This was when I was in LA and I was not working in the behavior department, but I was working in the shelter. And I for some reason, I was there earlier than normal that day. So right when the staff arrived, but before the kennels open, right, to the public. And, you know, as you expect, you get there and it's loud. I mean, even in an open paw shelter, right when you arrive, everyone's excited. You know, I mean, it happens in your own house, right? It happens everywhere. So rah, 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 everyone's kind of barking. But then I heard above all of the usual din, a really frantic, loud bark, and it was coming from the isolation. The quarantine area, not the isolation area, where dogs would be before they're out to the public. You have a period of quarantine if you're taking a dog in often, and she was back there, and in those runs in this particular facility, they didn't have indoor-outdoor kennel runs. They were just an indoor kennel closed in.
Okay.
They had one small space. They didn't have, an option with a guillotine door or anything where they could go in and out and potty like they did the rest of the shelter. And they had to be there. Usually, I think it was 72 hours in this shelter. So, but I'd never gone in there or really thought about it. I wasn't thinking about operations in those days. But this noise was enough that I sought it out. And then I saw this dog, and she was large. She looked like she might have been part Great Dane.
Wow.
Maybe Dane Shepherd or something. And she was very big, and she was just frantic in her kennel. And I mean, they're all excited, but this was different level. And I don't think I'd ever been in this room before. And it's a block of these kennels that don't have outdoor runs, and and everyone has a mess in their kennel because they've been there for 12 hours at this point. Sure. Or in this case, really, they've been there longer because volunteers aren't allowed to walk the quarantine dogs. Staff can't get to them. So, but what was different about her run was it was clean. And, she was on, I can't remember now, forgive me, it's been a long time. Yeah. But she'd been there well over 24 hours at this point, and it just dawned on me, well, she has to go to the bathroom. Like, it was rare to see a clean kennel in the morning in any facility at that point. And it probably still isn't a lot, to be, if you're honest with yourselves out there, when you walk in, how many kennels are clean?
Sure.
Especially, if your overnight hours are long. And there's no outdoor run. So she was holding it. She was toilet trained. She was house trained. She was clean. She was fastidious. Yep. And she was trapped in confinement without having an opportunity to go. So I said something to the staff. I said, I mean, I don't know why. I don't know if I was allowed to take her out or what. I didn't get her out myself. But I said, her kennel's clean. And they're like, look at me like, what? I'm like, she's been there for days and she's clean, she's been there overnight. And I think she really just has to go to the bathroom. It really dawned on me, these dogs are never getting out. And if she's clean overnight, she's probably been clean this whole time.
Wow.
And they took her out. The person kind of looked at me with a light bulb moment, like, oh, well. And just, got her out. And, she went for days,
bless her.
And, she peed like a racehorse and pooped. And she'd already been labeled. She'd already been labeled because she was obnoxious in the kennel and she was large. She was screaming and she was screaming at the people. I think, let me out, and, but she'd already had a reputation. She wasn't even on the adoption floor yet. Would she have even made it to the adoption floor because she was already getting a reputation as being a problem and as a big dog? And, she got out and it was a real sigh of relief for her. And she was a love bug and she was house trained. She was ready to go, and, and it allowed, and I said, and then they put her on a schedule. She's got to go out, and I'm sure there were other dogs there that were house trained, but had given in, in the same, usually when I talk about this dog, I do talk about how I was once trapped in a revolving door.
Oh, Kelly.
Long story. But it wasn't even an elevator. Many of us have been trapped in an elevator, at least briefly, right?
Yeah, sure.
And you're in the small room, and sometimes there are strangers in there too. And even if there aren't, you're like, what happens now? How long are we here for? Like, it makes you nervous right away. You're trapped.
Please tell me, Kelly, that the revolving door had stopped revolving and that you could stand still, because otherwise this is like a hamster wheel of doom.
Yeah, no, I was somewhere I shouldn't have been, I suppose. It was in my early 20s, and we didn't mean to be somewhere we wouldn't have been. Not that would have stopped us. But we were in there, in some places in the U.S. where it's very cold, in the Midwest, and in Canada, in certain places, there's a lot of underground walkways.
Cool.
To go outside in the cold. And I went to, I didn't know this, even as a person who lived in Chicago. And there was like a newspaper article about it. And we're like, we're going to go explore these underground walkways. But we didn't know it was downtown area or something, a district that was businessy. And it was closed on Sundays. But the door was ajar and we went in. It's not in this underground walkway, which is a public place, but it was closed. And I don't know, we went into there was a revolving doors at some point, and we got in, and then the latch that locks the door fell.
Oh my gosh.
So we literally were latched in to a little tiny triangle.
Oh no. Oh, honey.
And I was like, and it's Sunday at 1 in the afternoon or something, and this place isn't going to open till 5 or 6 a.m. the next day.
Wow.
And I just thought immediately that my first thought was, what if I do the bath? I'm going to have to go to the bathroom.
Right.
And I don't know, it always made me think of that moment.
And
it's
actually, you had the benefit there of the logic of, I'm not trapped here forever. I will get out of here because I know what time this thing opens. And so worst case scenario, I'm here for, do the maths, a certain element of control. But actually, dogs in rescue don't get that at all, do they? They've been dropped off by probably their favourite person in the world, or they've had a horrible 24 to 48 hours having been dropped somewhere else and picked up by a stranger and put in a kennel. And
what is this place and why am I here and do I ever get out and where's the bathroom? I mean, you think about it, anytime you go anywhere new, you kind of scope out where's the bathroom, what's the deal around here? And so the amount of stress and you just, and there are other dogs that are clean. It was just the fact that she was so upset about it, and then given also a label so early on. That part. So all of this to say, a big part of the Open Paw program is giving these animals an opportunity to go to the bathroom regularly, and let them know that, here we are, this is where you're going to stay for a while. And that this is actually more important in the quarantine and isolation where they first come in, because a lot of times they are held there for several days before they even get onto an adoption floor where maybe they will have a more regular walk schedule, or at least a lot of volunteers coming and going. And what's happening in this area is you're adding a tremendous amount of stress to what is already a stressful situation.
Yep.
And in many cases, you're de-house training them.
Yep. Wow.
They learn that they have to go in there, or they just get used to it. They don't want to.
It's a lot. People forget that. Even in the UK, I tend to educate my clients with puppies that, hey, do you know what? Your dog doesn't live in a kennel outside. Some people do. Some people do have dogs that live in kennels in the garden, and absolutely your choice. If that's been the dog's entire life, then absolutely fine. Take them and put them in a kennel when you go on holiday. But actually to use kennels for pet dogs is crazy, because that is not normal for them. Like, you're asking them to be in a really unusual environment and break their toilet training, because most kennels are set up next to a rescue centre, and it's a lovely way of that rescue getting a little bit of extra money. But actually, when it comes to something as simple as increasing the welfare on toilet breaks, honestly, Kelly, just blew my mind. Like, the things.
How could they not be doing it, right?
I know. Wow.
And I get it. And then there's no time, and there's cleaning, and it's like, then you have this reverse logic. It's like, why are you cleaning? Why is it taking you 3 hours to clean every morning?
Yes.
Because every kennel is soiled. Well, what if you got there a little earlier, and even if you didn't get there earlier, this is the other thing. Mm-hmm. If everyone knows they're getting out on a schedule, they will hold it.
Yep.
Most of them, not all of them are capable, and some of them are puppies, and some of them aren't house trained, or some will be stressed enough that there'll be accidents. But that becomes the exception, not the norm. Yep. Rather than telling them, well, you're just going to have to go in there. Mm-hmm. It's now like, no, you'll get out. Don't worry, it's going to be minimum 3 times a day. I'm sure you may have to hold it here and there, but you're going to get an opportunity. And given the opportunity, most of them, especially if it's at the beginning of their stay, if this is how they come into the system, they get on the program right away. They're like, okay, I get it. I'll get out if I hold it, these 3 times, or 4 times, and maybe more for bonus if volunteers get me out for walks. But a potty walk becomes an essential kind of right to an incarcerated animal.
Yeah.
And it's hard to envision at first, I think, for people in the system, because it seems like a lot of work and it seems impossible. But there is not one facility that I've gone to that doesn't spend literally, I've never seen to be under 3 hours the first thing in the morning cleaning.
Yeah, true.
And they're cleaning, and that's a waste of time. I mean, of course, I'm not suggesting things don't have to be clean or sanitary, but if they're not soiling their kennels, and this is where the UC Davis shelter medicine program really backs us up, a dog that is returning to its own kennel, that hasn't soiled its kennel, doesn't need hospital level sanitation daily.
Wow.
In a healthy population, as long as you've got your quarantine and isolation dogs separate, or as long as someone gets moved, if their status changes, they don't need that. You put them back in their own kennel, and they're clean. You do a deep clean once or twice a week and make sure that everything's sanitized. But it need not be done every day, all day, if they're clean.
Oh, wow. So you've literally taken the biggest and most time-consuming element of rescuing a dog in a rescue centre and slashed it in half in terms of time budget. We're saying we don't need to spend all of that time cleaning. And then we have this incredible budget of space and time to adopt some of these, training principles into the day-to-day life of the dog. So tell us, Kelly, when it comes to training, what kinds of training are volunteers given that they can then apply with the dogs? Because usually in my experience, it's the people who've had like multiple courses, or they've been trained by the behaviourists to be able to handle certain dogs and certain behaviours. Like, what are you teaching volunteers to be able to do that can really help the rescue centre move forward with these dogs?
Well, we've broken the behavior and training into levels, and we've done this, and it's not just a lot of places have levels for the dogs. And we do, and we still do recommend that, dogs are kind of coded. This dog is an easier dog for new handlers, and this one might be a behavior case, to put you at different extremes. But we also rate and level the volunteers so that everyone who comes in is given the opportunity to work with the animals and learn about animal behavior at level 1 through the safety of the kennel or fence or gate or room, or whatever it may be, the barrier where the dogs are. They don't need to go and get the dog out. That's not safe. Because again, you hark back to my beginning experience, they were, you have the extremes. Either don't touch the dog ever, or not on your first many, many visits, or hey, here's a leash, just go for it. So I don't think either of those are great. I think people can do a lot and affect behavior change simply by standing outside of the kennel and doing the initial class of conditioning, and then also some basic reward all or none training, learning to observe the behavior and looking for those pro-social friendly moments, or the moment of quiet, or whatever it may be that you're looking for to help that dog present themselves better to the public and also feel better. So everybody at level 1 can become a bit of a scientist and a behavior, observer, and it's safe. Anybody can do it. You don't have to stick your hands through the kennel. Like you said, you can use the little tubes, you can toss kibble in. Although I also would argue, certainly dogs can get a little snatchy because there's a kennel there and it's just, they're trying to get it and they're a little desperate. The more that you do this, the less they are like that. But also I would argue, if there's dogs on the floor for adoption that you don't want your general public handling, well, that's a whole different issue. These are companion dogs that are going to be fed treats and are going to be handled by people. If you don't feel that the dogs on your floor are capable of that, then there's then they need to go into a different program and maybe right in that general population until they can get there. Or again, you put some little safeties in place, because some dogs are just snatchy. They're not a monster and they're not going to be a danger to the public, but they're excitable. So, we teach people to toss kibble and to use chutes, and then also to work with, we teach people how to hold kibble in their hand or a treat so that, the dog can, with the barrier, can get to it without you sticking your hands in. And honestly, giving people something to do with their hands and a little bit of instruction goes a long way to helping with the safety of the environment. Because people will do the strangest things without direction. You might not provide kibble for them to feed, but I guarantee they are sticking their hands in the kennels. I've seen people stick babies' arms through kennels.
Wow.
I've seen people sneak into a kennel and lie down and spoon a strange dog.
Cool. Not cool, guys. No, retract my cool.
So the people that are, just because you're not telling them, it's kind of like dog behavior. The vacuum, telling them no. Telling them what they should be doing, and they're going to be doing something. They're going to be doing something. So it may as well be something you've asked them to do. So people can, and then what happens is the volunteers, they go through training weekly or whenever. The training at the lower levels is offered multiple times a week because it's actually pretty easy stuff. And so people can move through the levels as quickly as they want, and as they become proficient, or if they're super motivated, they can, and have some skill sets, they can move up through the levels and get to the point where they become like a dog walking expert or a potty break helper or things like that, where they're getting dogs out. But in the meantime, it's scaled, right? So your volunteers start as novices and they work their ways up with little tests. We have little proficiency tests that they go through, and the volunteers also train the volunteers at the lower levels, especially. You get a volunteer that doesn't have to be a behavior expert in order to teach other volunteers how to do level 1, for instance.
And that's sustainable behavior. That's amazing. That's
at the same time of the behavior person, right? The behavior staff then can handle the harder, more challenging dogs and work on their behavior programs, and train a smaller group of core volunteers that have the skill set and the gumption to work with the behavior cases. You don't need an army of volunteers to make this program work, or to even work on behavior cases. You just need people that are well trained. You don't need, 200 volunteers that come through every week. It doesn't hurt for the classical conditioning. If you have that, great. You may well utilize them at level 1. But people are kind of self-select and filter out at the levels, at their proficiency levels. And you also can shepherd volunteers into other roles. So maybe there's a person who is a lot of elderly or older people like to volunteer because they've got more time, but maybe they can't handle the biggest, strongest dogs anymore. Maybe they're a little more frail or underconfident with a large dog. Well, they can do level 1 training and really have a giant impact on the shelter environment and the community just by doing that every week. They can stuff the Kongs and the toys so that the staff doesn't have to do that. There are plenty of super useful tasks that people can do at any level. Kids, little kids easily do level 1 in Kong stuffing. They love Kong stuffing.
Come on.
I shouldn't say stuffed toy, rubber toy stuffing, food stuffing, stuffing the toys.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be Kong, and I am not sponsored by Kong. It's just kind of like Q-tip is something I say now.
Yeah, that's it.
But rubber stuffed toys, hollow toys can be stuffed by anybody, and kids really enjoy that. Like we do parties, we do school days, and they enjoy that kind of thing.
Come on, Kelly, you're talking about getting school children involved with dog rescue, which I don't know where you guys are listening from, what country you're starting from, but I know in the UK, most of the red tape would just be like, not the children in with the dog. But that's just so amazing, isn't it? Because maybe that would totally change all of the statistics that say, oh, you can't be housed with a child of this age. Or maybe actually if we invited children to be part of that process of retraining and rehabilitating, that those statistics might change. And for me, my head just goes into like the spider web of doom of behaviour, and which is why I love behaviour, because I go and if, and maybe then that would reduce. There's a lot of inference that there's a lot of UK rescue centres that get dogs from abroad, and many different opinions on both sides of the coin about that. But the biggest criticism in the UK for sure is that there's too many barriers to rescuing a dog in the UK. So it's just easier to get one from another country. So there's just so much that I think could be positively impacted by this kind of program. This is why I was just so keen to get you on. And yet again, Kelly, because we could talk about this forever, we're running out of time. So I wonder if you could leave us with your top 3 ways that rescue could adapt for the future of dog rescue. What might that look like from your perspective?
Well, they can adopt the Open Paw program and use that in their facilities.
Yes.
But the future to me, it's kind of been the same vision for my whole sheltering career, is I'd like to see the shelter spaces themselves change. I know that that's a dream picture. That's not going to happen tomorrow because we have these buildings and it's hard to reimagine an existing structure. But I do think you can creatively change up the way your shelter is set up. So, for instance, if you've got, again, think of the hotel model versus the prison model. How can we make these shelters more comfortable? How can we create, if you are designing a new shelter out there, if you've gotten that grant and, and you're able to redesign or build a new facility, because that seems to be the holy grail for most of the shelters that I work with. They're all working to grants to get a new building, to be state of the art and to be more welcoming to the human eye. But then they hire an architect who is not a dog expert, and they don't bring in any dog behavior experts when they're designing, and they get it all wrong. They put dog fish bowls, glass containers, because it's cool looking, floating staircases, like what the heck? This is not going to make the dog more comfortable. None of this. So reimagining what an actual shelter facility looks like, and or figuring out how you can make your shelter more welcoming from an animal's perspective, not just a human's perspective. Definitely toilet areas for every shelter out there. I'd like to see fostering replace some of the in-house kenneling as much as possible. Foster programs seem to be in a lot of facilities an aside, not a primary program. And I think that should be the opposite. The shelter should be for the animals that can't go into fostering for some reason, not, we have just a few fosters that can take a few places. So maybe volunteer training and outreach is more about telling people that they can help their community by fostering a dog, and then providing a little more education to the foster community about how to work with behavior. And also, I've never wanted the shelter to be the end of the line for the dogs in the community. I want it to be a place of learning, a vibrant place where people come because they love animals. The people in your community come there because it isn't a sad place. It's a place where they can have fun interacting with animals. They can feel helpful to their community. It's not sad. The animals are quiet. They can come there for classes. They can come take shelter dogs to classes. They can come there when they have problems. People feel shamed to go into shelters, or they feel they only do that at the last resort. I'd like a shelter to be a first resort. So rather than focusing so much on sheltering, why don't we focus on keeping those animals in the original home?
Wow. Yeah.
If somebody comes in, they're asked, it's a cry for help.
Yep.
And they may feel they've reached the end of their resources or options. They must give up their animal. If you do intake at a shelter, you know that this is heartbreaking for the majority of people who bring their animals in, or their family members' animal in, or whatever it may be. People fall into hard times. People are at their wits' end. They've been cited in the community for barking or dogs running at large, whatever it may be. Maybe they need financial assistance to get a trainer. Maybe you can offer training services. Maybe they need medical services. It's shocking how many dogs are turned in for minor treatable medical issues.
Sure.
I mean, really, spay and neuter, so that people aren't suddenly overwhelmed with too many animals in their home. Roaming stops if you've got, proper fencing, and if you've got, the dogs have been altered. There are so many resources out there, medically and behaviorally speaking, that can, the shelter can provide these services rather than just take the animal in and say, we can do better and we'll give the animal a better home.
Yes, which is lots of blame and shame, and actually culturally really messy, I know that is so good, Kelly. Just going to recap on that for those of you. She gave us 5 out of 3 actually there, which is great. So you always get more than you ask for if you're going to work with a Dunbar family member. It was true. So number 1 there was, first of all, get involved with Open Paw. You can find out more about Open Paw by checking Kelly Gorman Dunbar out on the socials, and also by talking to the DunbarAcademy.com. So you can find out loads more about Open Paw there. That was chief number 1. Get Open Paw into your centre, or start having that conversation definitely with a professional that has implemented it, and with Kelly's advice. Number 2, change your infrastructure. Build buildings with architecture specialists. Architects is the word we're looking for. It's obviously time for a cup of coffee. So yes, if you're going to build a shelter and you have amazing resource to do that, then get an architect and a dog trainer or behaviourist together to think about how the dog is going to experience that facility as well as the human. Number 3, Kelly said that we need toilet zones, definitely in the future of dog rescue. Number 4, to focus on fostering first and educating fosterers so that actually we can kind of start to disseminate the kennel model. And number 5 was exactly that, actually changing our association with rescue centres, making them not a super sad place, but a place of education and a first resort when we get to having problems. So I'd love, we could talk all day, Kelly, and I'd love to pick your brain perhaps in another episode about what we can do to change the heart behind that blame and shame culture, because I think there's a huge part of why people are reticent to ask for advice when they get to the stage and they're like, I just don't know. I'm at the end of my tether and I've tried all of the other options. And, even getting to the stage where you're like, I can't keep my dog. That's really heartbreaking for most people. I think there's just a huge compassion bucket that needs throwing over the world right now. That is where a lot of people stand, and they're not trying to be horrible, thoughtless people. Really not.
And sometimes it takes you going into the community. You can't, they might, and I think that's where it begins. Sue Sternberg started some programs 20 years ago where they had big, RVs, recreational vehicles that were outfitted, and they would go out and hand out leashes and harnesses and treats and do little mini demonstrations. And it didn't have to be like, this is a giant operation. And coming into the neighborhoods and helping people and knowing that it's kind of like the bookmobile. Do you remember the bookmobile?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. This was my heart a couple of years ago. It was like a dog education bus. I would love to do that. That's such a good idea. And it worked, right? Because Sue did it and it made a difference, huh?
Yep, and you get to, and then you start conversations, and then the shelter isn't this scary, ugly place, and then people will come, and when they need help. And why are we spending so much money housing animals, warehousing animals,
sure.
and when we could be keeping their animals in their original homes?
Yeah. That'd be my heart, really. Surely what we want to see is that rescues don't need to exist in the future because people are keeping their dogs.
Right? That shelter, but I think we can really reduce the sheltering part of sheltering by I seriously believe by 75-80% by doing outreach and so I mean, you're not going to put yourself out of business, shelters. You're going to just really change your focus and your positioning within the community, which I think would be more joyful for everybody as well.
So good, Kelly. You are absolutely one of the best game changers I've ever met to take something as complicated as the system of rescue and the way that we care for animals and rehabilitate them and just reimagine it in such a creative and measurably impactful way. So I'm just really celebrating you and everything that you've done today. And I hope loads more people jump on the Open Paw program and want to find out more about how they can implement that in their rescue centres.
Yeah, no, thank you. I always appreciate an opportunity to talk about the Open Paw program. It's just really, it's been the delight of my life. It's been a joy, and I'm so happy that you got to see it in action as well, so you can speak to the changes and the impact.
That's it. Where could people go, actually? That's a really good point, Kelly. I know the National Animal Welfare Trust in the UK is a good stop-off point. They are practicing Open Paw in the UK. But if you're maybe from another country, where are your other centres that people might be able to just go and investigate this a bit further?
That's hard to say. Shelters are always very busy, and they have a hard time keeping track of things. We have a hard time. We've had a hard time getting people to report in because I think a lot of people I know, a lot of shelters are using portions of the program because change takes time. So and maybe they feel like they aren't an Open Paw shelter because they aren't doing X out of XYZ. Sure. So they are all over the place, and I do have resources at Dunbar Academy where you can find some of our industry leaders that have done Open Paw. The RSPCA in Australia also took on Open Paw as within the entire community.
Wow!
In one of the areas, that was a long time ago. But in the UK, I think the National Animal Welfare Trust is the best. We do have an online educational program with Open Paw, so you can get a taste of what it's like to bring this to your own community. At the Dunbar Academy.com is probably the best way to access that information and to communicate with other shelters and leaders, because it is helpful having somebody who's already done it on your side, whether that's me or somebody else in your community. There are several shelters in the US that have been practicing for probably, I guess a decade now.
Wow. Okay, so that's so helpful, Kelly. We can find out more about Open Paw via www.dunbaracademy.com. That's DUNBAR academy.com. And you can stay in touch with Kelly on Facebook, on Instagram, and on TikTok. I am so impressed by you, Kelly.
I have it, but I haven't used
it. It's hard. I could get lost in the realms of TikTok. There's so many options. It's like using a complicated camera for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I get lost in a world of choice. Anything you'd like to close with, Kelly, for the audience of people whose minds I know you have firmly blown today?
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I'm very approachable. And so feel free to message me at any of my various social media outlets. And I'm always happy to discuss Open Paw and answer questions. And thank you, all of you that are in rescue out there, for doing what you do every day and being on the front lines. I know that it's something that you do out of love for the animals. And I very much appreciate your efforts.
Absolutely. I can echo that. Kelly, thank you so much. On behalf of everybody at the Future of Dogs podcast, you have absolutely blown our minds. And just to remind you guys who are listening to keep dreaming big dreams and chasing those what ifs that could just change the world.